Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to this learning experience brought to you by Redis. My name is Cody, and I'd like to welcome you back to Techstrong Learning, where we have yet another exciting presentation ahead. Before we get this thing kicked off, we do have just a couple of housekeeping notes I'd like to review with you. First, today's session is being recorded. So if you miss any of our discussion, perhaps you'd like to rewatch or maybe share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude this live session today. If you'd like to engage with us, there are a couple of options for you to do so. The first option is the chat tab, which you will find on the right side of your screen. I see some of you have already started testing that out for us, but I'd like you to go ahead and let us know in there from where in the world you are joining us. On the speaker side, we have New Jersey, New York, Fort Worth, and Austin, Texas. So let's see where everyone else is from. If you have any specific questions, we do want you to send those into the Q&A tab, which can also be found to the right side of your screen. Sending in your questions to that Q&A tab helps us keep track of these questions and answer them all in an orderly fashion. So send them in there and we'll make sure to get to them today. We do have a couple of polls that we'll be launching throughout today's program, so keep an eye open for those as they pop up. If you click the handouts tab, you'll notice there are 4 resources there for you. One of them is a copy of our presentation slides, so feel free to grab those today. And of course, before we close things out, we will be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So be sure to stick around for the duration of our conversation. So enough of that. Let's move on to today's topic, winning techniques for deploying and operating Redis at scale. And I'm joined today by John Noonan, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Redis, and Manish Arora, Solutions Architect at Redis. So John and Manish, thanks so much for joining me on Techstrong Learning. John, do you want to go ahead and introduce us to the rest of the presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Cody, and thanks everyone for your time today and for joining the webinar. We have what we hope is a really exciting topic lined up. Today we're going to be covering, as Cody mentioned, winning techniques to deploy and operate Redis at scale. And we'll be specifically focusing on 2 ways that many of our customers are implementing internal services around Redis. So we're going to be covering a couple of different approaches, when to take these approaches, the benefits that they bring, as well as how we at Redis can help make the entire process easier. So I guess just wanted to start by introducing myself. My name is John Noonan. I'm a product marketing manager here at Redis. I specialize in horizontal architectural solutions, so things that aren't specific to an industry vertical, but are widely used. So things like caching, Redis-as-a-service, microservices. And I've been with Redis for over 2 years, and I have nearly 10 years experience working in product marketing or product management for various technology companies. And I'm joined by my colleague, Manish. Manish, did you want to just jump in and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, John. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm super thrilled. I see that I see on the chat there are folks that have joined from Atlanta, from Bali, Indonesia, from Melville, New York. So welcome everybody. And Caracas, Venezuela. Wow. I'm super thrilled. So Manish Arora, Solutions Architect at Redis. Today's I'm celebrating my start of 3rd year. Very exciting space. I think for the last 2 years, it's been really fun to be here. I've been in the real-time space for last couple of decades, so I draw from that. I am customer facing, so I draw from that as well, and look forward to having this conversation today. Back to you, John.
Awesome. Thanks, Manish. So just wanted to quickly kind of level set on the agenda. Today we're going to be covering just a quick introduction to Redis, just in case anyone is unfamiliar with either the technology or us at Redis, the organization behind it. I want to cover some of the top challenges in running, specifically in running Redis at scale, and then get into the real meat of the presentation, which is 2 winning strategies that our customers commonly use to overcome a lot of the challenges. One would be establishing a center of excellence, so we'll cover what that is and what it entails. And then the other is integrating Redis into the shared services organization. So we'll discuss what components are needed and what the benefits are. We'll also be talking a little bit about how Redis, the organization, as well as Redis Enterprise, which is our commercial offering, can make the process of setting up Redis as a service easier. And then finally, me and Manish will be saving time at the end to answer any questions you have. So let's just start with a quick overview of Redis, just to make sure everyone's familiar with what we're talking about here. But before we dive in too deep, I just wanted to get a quick sense of how familiar everyone in the audience is with Redis. So just take maybe a couple seconds to answer the poll. Wanted to get a sense of how familiar you all are, and I think regardless of whether or not you're a seasoned expert or you're completely new to Redis, I think there will be something hopefully of value for anyone in this webinar. So just take a little bit of time to answer the poll. All right, so yeah, it looks like most people have heard of Redis, and it looks like there's also a lot of people that use Redis either periodically or as part of your job. So glad to see that there's that's not really surprising, and we'll get into a little bit about why. But glad to see there's a good mix. Just for those of us that maybe aren't quite as familiar, I just wanted to start really quickly with like a 10,000-foot view and lay a bit of the business and societal context around Redis. Just to focus on why Redis was developed in the first place, as well as why, as we can see, it's been so widely adopted, including by many of you in the audience. So, fast apps have been important for quite a while now. It's nothing new, but we all went through a pretty crazy time a couple of years ago with the COVID pandemic. And that really did spur, much more rapid digital transformation. If you think about during the pandemic, so much of our lives shifted from the physical world into the digital world. I mean, you could think about the changes to retail shopping, to supply chains, to healthcare, to so many things. And because of this reality, it became even more important than it already was to be able to conduct business digitally. As noted on the slide, 95% of enterprises accelerated their application modernization strategies during the pandemic. And we've seen that most of these modernization efforts are here to stay. Once they were adopted, that shift to digital remained. Because so much business is conducted digitally, and even more so in the past couple of years, performance really matters more than ever. There's a real business impact to increasing speed. 1/10 of 1 second increase in latency has been measured to improve average order value on retail sites by nearly 10%. So even the slightest improvement has, exponential business benefits. And to meet today's user expectations, businesses often need to get modern performance from their data layer, but they're often hampered by existing infrastructure or slower databases that just can't meet the need. And that's really where Redis comes in. Redis was built to provide the speed needed by today's applications. It was first introduced in 2009 as an in-memory data store, which means that the data stored in memory rather than slower disks or SSD, which allows for lightning fast retrieval. And this allows Redis to provide sub-millisecond latency, even for really large data sets at massive scale. Redis is really commonly used as a cache that can be used alongside existing infrastructure and databases to greatly speed up their performance without the need for replatforming and remigration. And it's also commonly used as a primary database for lots of use cases, especially increasing more recently. As a NoSQL database, Redis is incredibly flexible with the data models that it can work with. It supports everything from key value, standard strings, lists, and sets to streaming data and geospatial data. Redis is available as an open source technology as well as a paid enterprise grade solution in our commercial offering, Redis Enterprise, which excels in supporting the most mission critical applications. And just because of its speed, its flexibility, and its overall capabilities, Redis has become one of the most widely used and most loved databases available on the market today. Over the past 14 years, Redis has become a really critical component of the tech stack.
There's
Sorry?
a question on the chat here. I thought I'll
Yeah, go for it. Thanks, Manish.
I know that, so the question is, what strategies do you recommend for optimizing Redis performance and ensuring low latencies at scale. I know we were talking about what Redis is, so maybe you want to just give a broad stroke.
Yeah, you mean in terms of, yeah, sure. So, I mean, the strategies that we're going to be getting into in a minute are a center of excellence, which we'll get into, as well as a shared service. The center of excellence is really more to help businesses make smarter decisions and develop an internal area of expertise that they can share across the organization as they're building and developing with Redis. And then the shared service is actually setting up a centrally shared internal service around Redis, where there's one central organization that is used to deploy and operate Redis, and then other teams within the organization can basically go into a centralized service catalog and they can deploy the Redis service from there. So yeah, thanks for that, Manish. So over the past 14 years, Redis has become a critical component of the technology stack. It's used for everything from caching to microservices to fraud detection, session storage, for real-time inventory, just for a whole host of use cases, and even keeping up with some of the more buzzwordy use cases now, like ML ops and machine learning. Redis is becoming pretty widely adopted as an online feature store to help build smarter ML-based applications, and that's really just honestly scratching the surface. Manish, I mean, you help customers with many of these use cases. Maybe you want to just jump in and highlight a few interesting ones.
Yeah, thank you, John. It'll be my pleasure. One use case that comes to my mind is about a Fortune 5 healthcare company, which currently uses Redis as a service, offering for their internal customers, and supporting organizations' cloud adoption initiatives. This organization identified 3 broad categories of types of applications, where 1/3 of applications would be truly cloud native. The next third would be, say, hybrid, and the last third would continue to be on-prem. Their application needs varied. For example, like they needed a versatile in-memory database to support wide variety of different use cases. Just to name a few, right? API response caching, session management for capturing users' authentication and authorization data, and then one of my favorite one, where I had an opportunity to spend considerable amount of time, was a shared enterprise service layer deployed within a microservices architecture, supporting different data models such as JSON, time series, and streams. Now, where streams was helpful was for fast inter and intra-service data store and communication needs. Funny thing is, it was, as I mentioned earlier, it was deployed on-prem, it was deployed on cloud, and it was deployed on all flavors of cloud: GCP, AWS, Azure. I guess this organization had grown organically through M&A. One arm of organization was on GCP, other arm was on AWS, and the third one was on Azure. Though they were trying to get consolidate that, but that's where they were. So the hybrid way of being able to synchronize cache across all deployments, was they needed something, an in-memory database that could support that. They also needed to support analytical workloads that can be adopted for both no or low code change tools. So some of the applications where they did not want to make any changes because changes would require a lot of investment in time and resources to test everything out that they have already built. So there were low code options that they were looking for, where Redis Enterprise was able to help as well. There are a wide variety of other use cases where a versatile in-memory database, which can support both cloud native, on-prem, and hybrid needs. But I think we'll discuss more on that later. Back to you, John.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Manish. Appreciate it. So that's enough, I think, of the intro on Redis. It's very widely used. I think it's pretty great. I'm biased. But that said, organizations, they still often run into challenges, especially large, complex organizations that have many Redis deployments. So I just wanted to kind of jump into those challenges really quickly, and then we'll get into the actual solutions. So let's start by looking at a common pattern we see with businesses where there's really rapid Redis adoption. We've seen that many Redis projects begin at the grassroots level, where there's an individual developer or an individual team that is seeking to solve a very specific problem. So perhaps they're caching to improve the performance of a slow or overburdened database. And it goes successfully. And then eventually the company's Redis footprint begins to expand because Redis will be turned to by an increasing number of disparate development teams across the organization. And it'll also begin to expand a variety of additional real-time use cases. So you'll have more teams using it, and you'll have teams that are beginning to use it for things like session management, to support microservices, for fraud detection, for real-time inventory, for all those use cases we just covered a couple slides ago. And over time, the business finds that there are dozens of teams that are now deploying and managing Redis, all independent of one another, because they've all kind of taken their own approach at it. And this means that each of these teams are independently, going through trial and error. They're solving their own problems. They're designing applications. They're determining, which specific flavor of Redis is best for them, whether or not it's open source Redis, whether or not it's Redis Enterprise, or maybe one of the cloud-based Redis offerings. And then they're also independently deploying, building, and managing all of these applications. I totally understand sometimes different teams are running on a unique technology stack. They might have different architectures, or for whatever reason, they might require their own unique approach to Redis. There's not always going to be, a one-size-fits-all approach. But if teams don't at least have a way to communicate with one another, or have some sort of central resources that they can draw from, as well as potentially contribute to, especially if they're taking one of those more unique approaches, you end up with a situation that's really badly siloed. So Manish, I know you're always out in the field, and you're speaking to our customers and helping them architect their solutions. Did you want to just comment on some of the complexity and some of the challenges that you've seen with customers?
Absolutely. Thank you, John. So I think we've all faced this, right? In where we may have seen a siloed line of business, and as an organization, we may decide to go about solving this by a shared service across different lines of businesses, right? So I was helping this one customer, or these sets of different customers, who were trying to tackle this problem. I think there were some shared challenges that I had fumbled upon in my conversations with these customers, so I wanted to highlight them here. First one being differing business requirements. So one line of business, for example, each line of business may have unique business requirements, process, and priorities. It can be, so I think the second example that comes to mind is conflicting priorities. Lines of businesses often have their own objectives and key performance indicators. Conflicting priorities among different lines of businesses can make it difficult to align on shared service implementation in many cases, right? The couple more that I'm thinking about is governance and decision making. Establishing governance and decision making processes for the shared service can be very complex. Determining on who has the authority to make decisions, resolve conflicts, and enforce standards across multiple lines of businesses can be a challenge as well, which of course can lead to delays, disagreements, and many things around that, right? Maybe the last two that I'm thinking about is privacy and security. Now, one line of business may have certain data privacy and security requirements, and the other line of business may have a different need altogether, right? They may have compliance regulations or business sensitive needs, which are, again, going back to the requirements that each line of business may have. And lastly, change management and adoption, right? Introducing shared service requires change management efforts to ensure buy-in and adoption from different lines of businesses, different life cycles. For example, application team 1 may have a different application life cycle team compared to team 4. So those are some of the things that you would have to consider when you are when you are working through this as well. That's what I was thinking, John.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Manish. Very insightful. So those are some of the challenges. This siloed, disparate approach to Redis also has some pretty significant business implications. There's opportunity costs as significant resources throughout the organization are committed to managing Redis and operating Redis rather than driving business value and writing code and innovating. And this leads to a lack of growth because so much resources are dedicated to basically figuring out Redis and managing Redis when they could be spent on driving the needle for the business. There's duplication of efforts, right? If you think about it, how inefficient this is, there's dozens of teams that are all kind of solving the same problems. And this results in poor service quality and a lack of speed and scalability in Redis service delivery across the organization. It leads to slow time to market for new apps, and it leads to multiple teams being needlessly overburdened by deploying and managing Redis. Obviously, this approach is also typically far more expensive because you have multiple teams pursuing the same goals and solving the same problems instead of having some sort of organization-wide approach to Redis, or at least some sort of body of knowledge within the organization. You have many individual teams committing time and resources into solving the exact same problems, which leads to wasted time. And everyone knows that employee time is a very critical resource to an IT organization. And then, of course, there's a lack of standardization as well, with each team lacking centralized guidance without some sort of repository for best practices or standards in the Redis deployments. And that leads to a poor service delivery, to issues with deployment, and to risks around security, compliance, and governance. So we kind of outlined some of the problems. Let's dive into a few really common winning solutions that we see our customers using. So the solution to overcome these problems in these large, complex organizations where there's this disparate approach to Redis is to standardize. And we typically see our customers take any of three approaches. They'll use Redis Enterprise Cloud, which we're not really going to cover too much here. They can establish a Center of Excellence, or a COE, as a single team to assume responsibility for building and maintaining a very deep understanding of Redis, and then sharing that knowledge across the organization to all the other teams that are looking to build applications that leverage Redis. Or they can take it a step further, and they can integrate Redis into their company's shared services organization. And this establishes Redis as a service that individual development teams can use when they need a Redis deployment. So this shared service is standardized. It's typically available in a service catalog. It's then centrally managed, monitored, and operated by a shared services organization. And this really frees up all these different teams in the organization that were worrying about Redis to focus on building their applications. And I just want to point out, it's not an end or thing. You can have a Center of Excellence to help with some of the architectural decisions and kind of understanding emerging use cases with Redis. And then you can also have a shared service to deploy and operate it. So let's dive a little bit more into this concept of a Center of Excellence. In order to establish a Center of Excellence, an organization will typically need to first identify and establish a centralized team of Redis experts. This team is often comprised of individuals throughout the company that have relevant backgrounds, they'll have needed experience, and likely the people in the organization that have successfully used Redis. So they've already used it. They might be those first few pioneers that we talked about that are, building Redis applications at the grassroots level, and they're solving problems. But eventually the organization will get more organized around it, and they'll establish this Center of Excellence. Members of the Center of Excellence should really be well aware of Redis's features, its functions. They should be able to share best practices on when and how Redis can be used to enhance the value of an application. They're also responsible for staying up to date on the latest and greatest with Redis. So they would be learning things like how Redis may work for new use cases of the company, how to integrate it with other technologies. So how does it fit into the broader technology ecosystem? What's changed in the latest version of Redis if there's been a new version published? And once this team goes out and learns these things and they build that knowledge, they also have to document it and share it because that's where the real value comes in. So they're responsible for creating and sharing artifacts across the organization to document findings and learnings from the individual teams that have used Redis and to provide useful information such as maybe a best-in-class approach to Redis. So when they should use open source, when they should use Redis Enterprise or a specific cloud service and when. They would be providing guides to using Redis with other technologies, suggested architectures for building with Redis in specific infrastructures like microservices. They would also be documenting how to support numerous business use cases with Redis. So ultimately, what the Center of Excellence is to resource across the organization. As teams are building their applications, they don't need to invest their own time and their own effort into exploring Redis. Rather, they can simply consult with the Center of Excellence and receive a recommendation to ensure that they're taking the best approach to Redis for their given circumstances. Just wanted to provide a quick example of the type of things that we see with our customer centers of excellence, the kind of things that they're bringing and creating. They create a lot of artifacts, and they could be things very informal, like a Confluence page on how to use Redis with Kafka, or a best practice guide for upgrading Redis, or they could be something a little bit less formal, maybe just like notes from a previous deployment. What went well, what was learned. So that's kind of what a center of excellence is and what it entails. What are the benefits? Why would a business want to do this? First of all, they're going to get faster time to market because they're going to have a better and much more accessible body of knowledge around Redis that they can share. There's going to be much more efficient use of resources within the company. They're going to undergo much less time-consuming trial and error, which is going to be conducted by fewer teams. They're going to save money because obviously there's going to be less duplication of this efforts. They'll see increased Redis expertise because now they're going to have a centralized repository for information, for guides, for best practices, for architectures. Ultimately, they're going to be making much more intelligent decisions around which applications may benefit from Redis, how it can be used, how to architect them. And in the end, this all leads to much better Redis-based applications and a lot more efficiency. So if the Center of Excellence is beneficial and it helps organizations see all of these great benefits, well, how can we here at Redis help companies, and how do we help companies that are looking to establish a Center of Excellence? Like I just mentioned, we're the home of Redis. We provide access to the world's foremost experts at Redis, so we can help organizations achieve the deepest level, and we do this very frequently, help them achieve the deepest level of expertise in the technology possible. So as a part of that, we have the largest and the most knowledgeable team anywhere that specializes in Redis. And we can help with everything from training and certification to providing 24/7 enterprise support should there be some sort of issue with a customer's Redis deployment. We offer the best and most battle-tested enterprise version of Redis for customers' most mission-critical applications. So that means when an individual development team comes to the COE and they need a highly scalable, cost-effective, and very resilient version of Redis, the COE doesn't have to go out and build it themselves and take all the time and money that would entail. They can basically just recommend Redis Enterprise where it's appropriate, where it's a good fit within the organization. Let's say if there's a production application that there's a high degree of customer dependency, it needs to be deployed globally. So they can kind of use Redis Enterprise where it fits. And we also provide extensive resources for open source Redis as well as our Redis Enterprise service. And you can take a look at this is just scratching the surface. But we have webinars and tech talks to help developers and DevOps people and architects learn how to use Redis. We have our developer and our DevOps hubs. We have Redis University, which is free and anyone can take to really learn a lot about Redis. We offer Redis Insight to help customers visualize the data that they have in Redis. We put out tons of white papers like this ebook here, Caching Scale with Redis, which I highly recommend. It's an amazing guide to caching with both open source Redis as well as other versions of Redis. We have a free tier in our cloud offering that teams can use to really quickly and easily get started and actually start building Redis databases for free. And we just overall provide a wealth of resources to help companies research, understand, and effectively use Redis. And one thing that I also wanted to highlight is we also offer professional services trainings and certifications for Redis operators to help businesses really solidify their practice around Redis. So that covers the Center of Excellence. Onto our next winning strategy, which is really crucial to deploying and managing Redis at scale, which is the concept that I mentioned a little bit earlier after Manish serviced that question. But this is establishing a shared service around Redis. So this is an internal service to centrally deploy and manage Redis. It's run by an independent organization that establishes a standardized Redis service, and this is available for use organization-wide. So the typical components that we see with our customers that are setting up a shared service are, first and foremost, a shared services team. These are the people that are responsible for maintaining the organization's Redis service. They provide a centralized process to deploy Redis, and they're responsible for the management and support of all the Redis deployments through the shared service. This team is responsible for maintaining SLAs across the organization for things like how long it takes to deploy Redis and all the underlying infrastructure once a team has requested a Redis deployment, as well as the overall service health, the uptime SLAs for all of the Redis deployments under their purview. Redis-as-a-service needs to be deployed via some sort of service catalog to provide a single experience to developers, to architects, to application teams, to individual business units, where they can access the catalog of items and request various Redis-as-a-service configurations to be provisioned based on their application needs. So things like they'll have usually a standard deployment that they can provide t-shirt sizes, they can provide their replication needs, resilience needs, what type of environment it's going to be deployed into, things like that. And then they'll get a standard deployment based on those inputs. Infrastructure as code is another crucial feature of a shared Redis service. By controlling infrastructure deployment, the administrators are really able to drive consistency, efficiency, and visibility. So tools such as Terraform, we commonly see, will really help standardize the creation of these Redis deployments across the organization. And the shared services team also commonly provides scripts that embed API calls for provisioning. Portability and containerization are another crucial component. So once a team is requested infrastructure, the shared services teams have to be able to really quickly and efficiently provide the infrastructure that's needed and wherever it's needed. So Kubernetes really allows for quick infrastructure deployment anywhere, complete with multi-tenancy, quick scale out, and efficiency. And finally, this is going to be something we're going to hone in on quite a bit, but the shared services team requires centralized monitoring, support, and operations. So the administrators are responsible for monitoring the status of all their various service offerings at all times. They'll be the ones that are setting up observability dashboards and monitoring alerts to email and SMS if a Redis deployment starts hitting its memory limit or it's running out of capacity. And as mentioned previously, the shared services team is responsible for the overall health of all the Redis clusters, as well as actually troubleshooting any issues and providing general maintenance for things like patching. So there's, when there's a catastrophe, they're the ones that are jumping in and addressing it. And they also handle the day-to-day type operations to free up the various teams across the organization. So just to kind of help, define things a bit more, let's quickly just walk through an example shared services deployment. I think this will kind of tie the point home. So a developer browses a service catalog, and then they would pick a service. So if they do go with the shared services approach, Redis or Redis Enterprise would be one of the services available to the developer in the service catalog. The service catalog can be a popular platform like ServiceNow, or it could be custom built. We kind of see both approaches when we speak to customers. So typically, the catalog will check the internal cost set for the requested service item. And if the requested service falls above a certain budget, if the requested service falls above a certain budget threshold, so let's say it's like $500 per month, the request would then be sent over to the manager of the department because it would be flagged for something that needs approval. If the request is approved, the service would be provisioned using the default settings. And the provisioning, as I mentioned, it's generally very highly automated using infrastructure as code templates. Once provisioned, monitoring would be set up so that the central shared services team that's operating the Redis deployment can keep an eye on the service for its health and make sure that all the SLAs are met. The developer would then be notified of the service details so that they can access it and start using it. And then in parallel, the cost of the service would be deducted from the team's budget. The finance and operations team, depending on who owns the budget, would then be notified. And just all in all, in the end, developers are able to access the Redis resource, and the shared services team is responsible for managing, monitoring, and operating the service. So that's a really quick, like kind of 10,000 foot oversimplified, way that we see it work. Manish, would you mind chiming in on some of the considerations that individual architects or teams would need to make when they're going into that service catalog? Because I know there's a lot of different ways that they can deploy Redis as a shared service.
Thank you, John. I love this flowchart, to be honest. I think this simplifies the process, and this gives a framework to be used by our communities that are trying to adopt Redis as a service in their organization, right? So this is many times you can take this as a framework, customize it to your needs, right? So here are a couple of things that I had seen while helping customers, and I would like to just highlight them. I think we briefly touched upon this earlier as well, but I think to drive the point home, we know that different applications will have different needs, right? Application A may have different data durability need versus application B. My business needs may have special regulatory compliance or availability need, right? What do I mean by that, right? For caching can be considered ephemeral. If so, maybe their persistence is not as big or as important, right? Whereas if you are doing a session management use case, then persistence is key. So for such a need, you would want to make sure you select the right service catalog. Do I have any data transformation needs, right? So caching in a large enterprise is not the only problem or only component in your ecosystem. You may have other systems of records, other components that have to integrate really well. So can you integrate that, integrate your caching layer and your application layer seamlessly, whether it is through a cache prefetch mechanism or a cache aside mechanism? Those are some of the things that you may also want to consider when you are making sense of, okay, pick this service, pick this integration mechanism, for example, right? Just to add a couple more points here, developers or architects will typically have standard deployments to choose from. It can range from basic throughput, data size, and the resiliency requirements, and then a standard deployment and then customize a deployment that best fits their needs to be deployed, right? Considering Redis currently is used for mission critical applications, so performance and scalability and resiliency are some of the key components that one should take into account when making a choice here as well, right? I think that's all I wanted to add here. Back to you, John.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Manish. Appreciate that extra information there. It's very, very insightful. So let's just move on to the next component of a shared services organization. So we just kind of ran through the service catalog, the deployment, workflow. The next big thing is observability. So as I already kind of previously touched upon, observability and monitoring are really key components of establishing a service around Redis. And ultimately, this responsibility mainly falls on the shared services org, although there are joint stakeholders. So the shared services administrators, they need to understand the status of all their various service offerings across all the different teams at all times. And they're the ones that are responsible for maintaining the uptime of the Redis clusters. And they're really responsible for establishing all the different monitoring KPIs that are going to be important to them, configuring all the different thresholds that will trigger an alert, setting up alerts, so like SMS or email alerts, so that they can get a push notification of any potential issues. And they're also going to be creating monitoring dashboards that allow them to regularly view the Redis health at a macro level across all of their different deployments. And then additionally, I mentioned, it's kind of a shared responsibility, but the various business segments that have requested a Redis deployment through the shared service, they're responsible for the actual databases and the data in those databases. So each of these individual teams will typically have a dashboard showing the health of their own respective Redis databases, while the shared services team is kind of looking at the clusters as a whole. And then in the next slide, I'm going to kick it over to Manish, just to kind of cover some of the key KPIs that businesses are looking out for, as well as how to tell when there might be an issue that needs to be escalated or investigated. So go ahead, Manish, over to you.
Thanks, John. So I think this slide would summarize some of the, though there are n number of metrics that one could be looking at, but I think this slide summarizes 10 top metrics, which would give your DevOps team insights into the inner workings of the cache platform. Let's start with the first one, right? Database latency. Here we are looking at latency provided by your cache layer, and you would have a threshold, say anywhere from 1 millisecond to 10 milliseconds for your particular need, right? If your application starts to see any type of any breach in this threshold, then I think your DevOps team would have capabilities to generate alarms and take some proactive actions around that, right? For example, if you see there's a Thanksgiving event coming up, and you may need to scale your infrastructure to prepare for that, for a Black Friday event, then you may want to take proactive action if you observe a pattern of increased latency. That could be one area. Whereas there could be another thing, whereas you have made no changes in your application yet. When you started out, your application latency was X, and now it has increased. So perhaps there is time to bring in open a support ticket with Redis Enterprise, for example, and to troubleshoot, okay, what are some of these queries? Why are they taking longer than they need to, right? So that's just the first metric, right? Similarly, there are 9 other metrics and that your DevOps team should be keeping an eye on, which I will highly recommend for you to use. I won't spend that much time here going over each. These are self-explanatory and available to you via slides. We have 150 other metrics if you ever wanted to look more, but I think this is what our customers are using for their DevOps needs.
Awesome.
Thanks, John.
Thanks so much, Manish. Appreciate that. So then I guess why and when should you add Redis to your shared services org? Honestly, the answer really depends on how widely your organization is using Redis. It's not going to be a good fit for everybody. If you have many teams, maybe more than 10, that are kind of each taking their own approach to monitoring, patching, and troubleshooting, as well as just generally managing Redis, there's a really good chance that you'd benefit from adding it to your shared services org. If you're on the smaller scale, you might not, you wouldn't see a lot of the problems and realize a lot of these benefits. But if it is a good match for you, there's a lot of benefits, like much easier and more efficient Redis operations due to automation, decentralized monitoring, infrastructure as code, and just much less duplication of efforts. Businesses will typically see reduced costs just due to all this increased efficiency. The shared services approach will lead to increased quality and much faster time to market, because each team will be able to simply deploy a standardized service from a centralized catalog. They don't need to go ahead and figure out everything from how to provision infrastructure to set up Redis. They can just quickly spin up a service, receive their Redis database, and take it from there. Because there's a much more centralized approach here in deploying and operating Redis, there's a much greater degree of security, and there's a much better ability to enforce regulatory and compliance standards, and ultimately kind of similar benefit to the COE. All of this efficiency just really frees teams to focus on building their applications and not taking their time to deploy or manage Redis. So it really just reduces the opportunity cost. So let's just take a quick pause for another poll. Now that we've covered a number of these different approaches to Redis, I just kind of wanted to get a sense of if these approaches resonate with the audience, especially for those of you that use Redis for work. I was wondering, what approach does your organization take? So if you wouldn't mind, just go ahead and take a few seconds to answer. All right, so it looks like we're on the individual team approach, which, as I mentioned, and there's a lot of circumstances where that would be the best approach. But if you're at a company that has a lot of different teams using Redis, you guys might want to consider exploring establishing a center of excellence. And if you have already a shared services org, you might want to think about getting Redis added to that. And thank you for answering, by the way. I appreciate that. So if a shared service for Redis is right for you, how can we at Redis help you implement it? To start, we offer Redis Enterprise, which will save you the time, the effort, the trial and error of trying to build an enterprise-grade Redis service yourself. For the times that your organization needs a Redis deployment for production that has critical data and has a very high degree of customer dependency, you can just go ahead and deploy Redis Enterprise. And that will employ Redis Enterprise where it's needed. Will provide flexibility because it can be deployed in any environment with just about any data type, and it supports every major Redis use case. It gives you sub-millisecond latency, and it's able to maintain this performance even at really large data sets and at really high throughputs. We have a lot of customers that turn to us for that. Another big differentiator is the high resilience and the 99.999% uptime. That ensures that Redis is always available and the apps are always performing in all places and at all times. And that's going to be especially crucial if you have a shared service and a team has requested a highly available Redis deployment because they're using it in production for a customer application. And then Redis Enterprise also brings excellent cost efficiency. So we have the ability to auto-tier between SSD and RAM, which greatly reduces the cost of storing really large data sets in Redis. Without significantly impacting the performance. And we also offer multi-tenancy, which allows for maximized efficiency of Redis infrastructure by allowing for multiple completely isolated databases to be hosted on the same infrastructure. So that's another really great benefit from a cost standpoint. We also offer integrations with major DevOps and operational tools to ensure that...
Sorry to interrupt here. There was a question, if you go back to the last slide.
Yeah, of course.
I think there was a question here. Curious to see options for search. Love Redis for a ton of other use cases. If you can please elaborate on Redis and searching capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, Redis Enterprise, it supports all the core Redis data types, like I mentioned, the streams, the lists, the hashes, sorted sets. But we also have kind of native in the product the ability to do a lot more. So we have key features around that enable Redis's performance for time series data, allow teams to search and query in real time on data that's held in Redis. So we have a lot more advanced capabilities that are just kind of native to the product, and search is definitely one of those, and it's one that we see customers commonly use. They'll use Redis for search, they'll use it for secondary indexing on data that's held in their databases, and all these advanced capabilities just come native as part of Redis Enterprise.
Yeah, no, thank you, John. I was just thinking about this other use case around OpenAI and how vector databases will store vectors, and how do we enable vector searches. So I think you may have already started to look at how ChatGPTs and the large language models, for example, are helping change query and answers in the public domain. But I think many organizations, many fintech organizations, many large organizations are looking to have similar knowledge bank using large language models cater to their enterprise needs. For example, you are a large fintech organization, maybe one of the top three in North America, and you want to use your private knowledge bank to serve your customers, where this knowledge will never leave data that is within your enterprise's domain. Then can you utilize some of the large language models? Can you utilize the vector database for querying and searching records in real time? Answer is absolutely yes. And I think Redis is doing a phenomenal job in enabling these technologies. We have some of the great tools around that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Manish. Yeah, that's definitely, we're seeing a lot more activity around that, especially the vector similarity search. So thanks so much for mentioning that. So back to this slide, we were talking about ways that Redis Enterprise can help enable organizations that are looking to set up a shared service around Redis. So another way, we talked kind of about the native benefits and advanced functionality of Redis Enterprise. Another way, though, is that we have integrations with pretty much all the major DevOps and operational tools that the shared services team would be using. So we have integrations for monitoring. We kind of already touched upon a few times how important that is, but we have extensive integrations for observability so that the shared services team can make sure that the Redis deployments are all healthy and performing as expected. We have integrations for things like secrets management that make centrally storing and using sensitive information across these complex organizations much easier and much more secure. We integrate with all popular infrastructure as code tooling, and this enables teams to very easily build, change, version Redis safely and efficiently, and do that using code. And then we integrate with service catalogs so that Redis can easily be offered as a service within most existing platforms that developers across the company or teams building with Redis across the company can log into and are already familiar with. And then just finally, if you're operating a shared service around Redis, all these individual teams need to be able to go into the service catalog, give you the t-shirt size. We kind of talked about that process. But behind the scenes, infrastructure, so like a VM or a server, needs to be deployed to support the Redis database. And this all needs to happen within the SLA established for how long it takes to provision a Redis service. This infrastructure often needs to be deployed in multiple different environments. It needs to be available on multiple clouds or on premises. And that's really where Kubernetes comes in. Kubernetes allows for very efficient and portable infrastructure deployment. I'm sure you guys already know that. Redis Enterprise, though, works really well with Kubernetes. A Redis Enterprise cluster running in containers or pods can be deployed as part of a Kubernetes cluster. And running a Redis Enterprise cluster on Kubernetes really involves two systems, the cluster itself and the Kubernetes orchestration system. And Redis Enterprise offers an operator for Kubernetes to ensure that both of these systems are working together in harmony. It really automates a lot of the configuration and execution of any Kubernetes functions and any Redis-specific controls to automate the operation of the data platform. So it really works well into Kubernetes. We see a lot of customers deploying it that way. And then finally, this is something that's also, I've heard a lot from customers, but our support. So it's not surprising that here at Redis, as I mentioned, we have the largest and most knowledgeable team of Redis experts. We're the team of experts, basically, that the experts at your company can turn to when there's an issue. So, everyone in your company will turn to the shared services org, but let's say they're having trouble with Redis. Who can they go to? Well, they can come straight to us, the home of Redis. And we really have over a decade of experience in managing and supporting Redis in the most complex, mission-critical, and demanding customer environments. So, I mean, anything you can think of, we've pretty much done with our customers. So that really covers it. Those are the two winning strategies that we often see our customers taking when they're designing, when they're building, or they're operating and running and deploying Redis at scale. Just wanted to say thank you so much for your time. And if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A, and Manish and I would be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John. This is excellent. There's one question here which I'd like to just discuss. So Redis today in the open source arena is used as a key value. How much overhead to convert through JSON from a SQL database for roughly of 100 gigabytes of data? John, if you don't mind, maybe I'll chip away and then you can add.
Yeah, please. Yep. That's, I'll be honest, that might be your purview. I don't know the answer to that. So.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
So I think this is a great question. Thanks for this question, by the way. So generally speaking, when we use Redis as a key value store, there is overhead there as well. There's padding involved. So for example, let's say for every key and for every value portion, if it is stored as a string, right, there's padding involved. Not all strings would conform to the 4-byte, 8-byte, that boundary, right? If my memory serves me correctly, I think the way it's defined is there's a 64-byte area defined for a key value, right? So depends upon if, let's say, you've saved a key's name is a name and the value is, say, Manish, then I may have used up 1, 2, 3, maybe 5, 6 bytes there. One last one for null, and then the remaining would still be used. So basically, there's an overhead in a key value as well, right? Now, when we are talking about a JSON and when data is coming from a SQL database, so the same concept is applicable. And I'll break it down slightly, right? When you talk about JSON, how do you store the fields of JSON? You store the fields, if you store them as a string and a value, then a same 64-byte per number of field will be applicable, right? But I think we here at Redis realize that fact, right? That every field does not need to be saved over and over. So if you have, let's say, 100,000 JSON records, if you're going to, and if the names are reappearing, you're going to have so much of superfluous field names that is going to be saved in Redis. So we realized that we've optimized it out of the way, right? And then secondly, we wanted to leave you with, I think there was a question around how can you make this data searchable, right? Can you search through the key? Yes, absolutely. You can search through the key, right? What's the advantage of our JSON data? Instead of you extracting the blob out of Redis, you can work at the field level. You can do the atomic update. You can increment a counter. You can decrement a counter at an atomic field level. You don't have to extract an entire blob of data over the network and then in your applications, on your applications memory side, do whatever change you have to do and then resave that on the cache layer, right? No, you can. So basically, the serialization and deserialization that you would have to do, you don't have to do it. So you can use some of the capabilities that we have built around that. Coming back to your question per se, will there be overhead? Absolutely, yes, there will be overhead. I think if you have a strong use case, I think we should, just look at that use case per se. But I think there will be some overhead, and I don't think I can quantify it. I hope that gives you a thought framework around when you're building it. You want to test out how much of the data is going to occupy.
Thanks, Manish.
Awesome. Well, John and Manisha, it does look like we are at the top of the hour, so I'm going to have to cut things short. But to our audience, thanks so much for all the questions you guys sent in. You really were able to fill out every extra minute that we had. So I hope everyone was able to get a lot from this. So John, Manish, thank you both so much for joining us today. It really means a lot to have you on Techstrong Learning with us.
Thanks so much for having us, and thanks everyone for attending.
Awesome. So just a quick reminder that this session was recorded. You will be receiving an email with a link to access the recording on demand. It will also be living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars. Just be sure to look in the on-demand section. If you look in the chat, you'll notice I posted a link to our survey. Please click that for us, or just stick around as you'll get funneled to that survey after we close out. But we would love to hear your feedback there. The 4 winners of our $25 Amazon gift card drawing are Janet R., Barish C., Darshit D., and Brewer S. So to our 4 winners, congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim your gift card. Should make its way over to you in the next 48 hours. But if you don't happen to see that, check your spam folder just in case it happens to get filtered out. I'd like to thank Redis for sponsoring our program today. And to everyone who's still with us, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you joining us. And like I said, if you just stick around for that survey, we'd love to have you fill that out. Otherwise, we do hope to see everyone at a future Techstrong learning experience. Have a great rest of your day. And again, John, Manish, thank you both so much.